The AI bubble has burst, at least according to those who believe a 24-year-old hedge fund manager who got investments from the elites of Silicon Valley to the tune of somewhere between 10 and 15 billion. His funds grew through leverage to something of the order of 45 billion. And in the last week or so, has lost over half of its value, apparently close to 70% of that value. And so we believe that, some of us believe that to be an indicator that the AI bubble has burst because Leo Aschenbrenner's fund has essentially collapsed, and he has kind of been one of the leaders in terms of the thesis in which you should be investing in AI infrastructure. So, Matt, are you a believer or not in that opening statement?
Well, the rest of the market has not collapsed in the last week. It was essentially this guy had a really concentrated position in a few stocks. Those stocks went down considerably. Apparently also a whole bunch of Korean retail investors also lost their shirts on this and got margin called. So there was a hype around memory stocks that were concentrated in South Korea. Those stocks went down, and this position that he had lost more money than he modeled. And so essentially he had to sell all of this stuff to a guy named Ken Griffin, who runs, I'm going to say Citadel.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the guy, the Aschenbrenner first, who he is. He's not your kind of normal, and I'm going to call him a kid because he's 24 years of age. A German guy, son of two physicists. Matt, you should like this guy straight away. Prodigy at Columbia. I think he was a valedictorian at 19. What does his resume look like as a 24-year-old? Well, he went on to Oxford. He worked at FTX. He worked at OpenAI. And I think it's when he was at OpenAI, he wrote this essay, which I read most of a couple of years ago, called Situational Awareness, which there's a lot of stuff in there. It's quite interesting. It's a great, if you're getting into AI, it's a great kind of opening essay, albeit very long. But his prediction was AGI was going to happen around 2027. And he built an investment thesis around that and launched this fund called Situational Awareness around June 2024. And he, as I said, got investment from like the Collisons and a bunch of the celebrities in Silicon Valley around this investment thesis, which is primarily, as I understand it, in AI infrastructure. I don't have the exact numbers, but the run-up, the first 18 months performance of the fund was excellent. I think I read somewhere like it was up 1,000% at one point.
Yeah, something like that. It was like 10 or 15x, yeah.
So if you go back maybe to June of this year and ask yourself, is there an AI bubble based on what we're seeing Situational Awareness's fund do? You'd say, no, they're doing great. It's growing very quickly. All is good. But things really turned in July, right? Even 2 weeks ago, I think they were doing okay. But as I understand, he's a hugely leveraged position.
Hugely
400%.
leveraged and hugely concentrated. I find this kind of thing fascinating. And I think we need to rewind to another part of Leopold's biography, which is that he worked for FTX. And like Sam Bankman-Fried, who he was, of course, very closely related to, he worked at the same firm and while it was collapsing, he left right before. Early Anthropic investor, effective altruist. He started the first effective altruism group at his university, which was not too long ago. He was 24, but, very into effective altruism and early Anthropic investor like Sam Bankman-Fried. I think that's a huge part of where his fund's value still is in Anthropic, which relies on Anthropic being valued at $1 trillion, right? So if Anthropic is not able to go public and goes from that $1 trillion valuation down to a measly 300 or 400 billion, then, you can see addition. I mean, this is a very highly concentrated position. And the reason I bring this up about Sam Bankman-Fried is not just to cast dirt on him, but Sam Bankman-Fried shared a very specific thought about risk management and portfolios. And essentially, because EA is very much like a religion, is one way to think about it. Sam Bankman-Fried said the chances that he's right and is able to make like $1 trillion, even if that's only a small percentage of the time, that's worth it, even if most of the time he goes to zero, right? But of course he went to zero. And then you have this guy, Leo Aschenbrenner, who essentially did not do effective risk mitigation because he kept a very tightly concentrated, high leverage position. And those are two different sources of problems. He was 4x leveraged in gross, which means for every dollar he had in capital, this is the people like the Collisons gave him money, and I respect the Collisons a great deal. It seems like a pretty good bet for if you're Collison. You put $100 million into this fund, and Stripe's worth $50 billion, and maybe it turns out, maybe it doesn't, whatever. It's part of your portfolio. But for Leo Aschenbrenner, who's running the fund, for every dollar that someone like the Collisons put in, he borrowed $3 more on top of it, right? Now, what's the problem with that? If I enter a stock at $100 and I have 4x leverage, if it goes to 200, I don't double my money. I 8x my money. But there's a downside to this, which is on the other hand, if it loses even 25, if it goes from $100 to $75 and I'm 4x leveraged, 25 times 4, I lose 100% of my money. Right. And so that's problem number one. And that's just leverage. And the second one is concentration. He's telegraphing the type of stocks that he's in, and he has highly concentrated positions, which means that they can be attacked. And what that would happen is, firms like Jane Street are massively profitable. And a huge thing they do is they understand other people's positions and then not only invest against them, but attack them. And, there's a lot of speculation how it happened. But you can just go short in a stock and bring its price down mechanically. In the same way that if you buy a lot of stock, it'll go up. There are things that you can do to apply a lot of leverage short on a stock. And if someone like Leo owns 30% of the stock, what's going to happen is if he starts to get into the position where he's about to lose 25% or because he's 4x, he's going to lose all his money, which means he needs to start selling stocks. And because it's concentrated, he can't sell some of the things that are up to pay for some of the things that are down. He has to sell the thing that's going down to pay for his margin calls, which because of he's now a huge proportion of that stock, it drives it down further. So this happened to a fund by Bill Huang a few years ago named Archegos. I might be pronouncing both of those wrong. FTX has flavors of this, highly concentrated. And CZ, who is one of the famous Bitcoin crypto guys, attacked Sam Bankman-Fried's position in a similar way. So this is like a very similar type of highly concentrated, telegraphed position, high leverage. Bill Huang went down with Archegos, Sam Bankman-Fried went down. And it's just funny, and maybe this is because he's 24 or 25. He's obviously a super smart guy in a lot of ways, but it's just like, didn't you see this guy that you knew go to jail in the exact same way? And I think what happened is he thought he had done enough to protect himself, but guys like Ken Griffin were warning him a month ago, like you're too concentrated. And when enough people see the opportunity and they pile in, it doesn't matter how much money SK Hynix is making, you're going to get blown out. And that's what happened.
Yeah. And it seemed it was even a little bit worse than that in the sense of the leverage aspect of it. But he doesn't appear to have been hedged in any way, in the sense he was long on, let's call it AI infrastructure. So the things that support that whole industry. And he's like, in the long run, we're going to make a lot of money out of these. And then he also, not on the flip side, but really on the same side of that coin, said, and because of that, we're going to see a drop in value of all these software businesses. So I'm going to go short on those software businesses. So essentially, he placed a similar bet twice.
Yes.
So
that was not a hedge. There's a name for this, like some kind of hedge that just like the opposite of a hedge, where you just bet the same bet twice.
So now, to be fair to him, the fund is not dead. They had to liquidate, I don't know, maybe 70% of their position to cover everything.
Here's the thing. They liquidated everything that wasn't nailed down. They can't get liquid on Anthropic, where Leo Paul, his now wife, they got married like this weekend. Imagine the fun at that wedding, like. Is the chief of staff for Dario and at Anthropic, right? So that can't be sold, right? Like, and Dario's been actually pretty mad about people selling positions in Anthropic and reselling them. It seems like, Leopold got a pass, but essentially has a fund with a bunch of Anthropic, which he can't sell because Anthropic wants the IPO, and you can't just go selling in secondary, right before an IPO for many reasons. And so that's all that he couldn't sell is these private illiquid positions. All of it, he basically handed over all of his public positions to Citadel, is what it seems like. I don't know the details, but seems like kind of idiosyncratic to the EA folks, but guess who else has very similar mindset? SBF, Leopold, Dario is an EA guy, Sam Altman and all the OpenAI guys have a very similar bet it all, go big, the future's at stake, the light cone, the YC podcast is now called the light cone podcast, which is this kind of like catastrophic thinking that like if the AI that controls our light cone is evil, there's no way to escape it. It will travel faster at the speed of light in every direction, and it will spread evil and misalignment permanently, and you can never escape it. You're doomed. So it's worth it right now to take infinite risk if you are these people to ensure that it goes well. And even if you get blown up, that's nothing compared to the light cone of all future possibilities for existence. Anyway, you
so
can
pretty
imagine.
positive outlook. But let's go back to the original question. Is Leo's situation an indication that we're in a bubble? And I think I'll answer first from my perspective. The answer is pretty obviously no. And what do we mean when we say a bubble? And a bubble portends a crash. So a bubble in my mind is where supply exceeds demand. And I have yet to, we might see blips along the way. We might see temporary misalignment in that. But there's nothing really to suggest to me that this is a crash or a bubble, and certainly not his situation. We kind of tease it apart between the leverage and the lack of hedging seems to have been his downfall. But maybe I'm being too simplistic, Matt. What do you think?
I also agree. I don't think there's a bubble simply because the amount of demand, I think since coding has been solved, and I'm going to kind of like start to wink at our next topic, which is OpenAI's progress in math. Since November, they solved coding, right? The addressable market, and I was doing some numbers this weekend, something like, we're just asking, we don't know these for sure, but we're just kind of asking based off of the amount of money and what we've heard, something like 9 million new software projects have been started in the last 6 months. Right? And with Fable, those are just going to get better. I've been running a software project probably since before Opus, and it was annoying, but I kind of got it running. And then Opus made it much better. And it was kind of exciting. And then kind of got bored of it again because it was just kind of like pulling teeth at some point to get it done. And then Fable came out and it got even better, right? And the thing is, every time these models get better, it's not going to go 9 million. It's going to be 50 million. Companies that would have bought software are going to build it internally. People that would have purchased a service are going to do it themselves. Just the building software is fun. I've always enjoyed it. It's like a game. $200 a month for I can build anything I want. I can do physics projects from 20 years ago that I've like kind of dropped and I want to like do again. It's incredible. It's the funnest thing ever. And so what we've seen is Anthropic's revenue has gone like 10x already this year. Right. Somebody at OpenAI announced that their Codex revenue, which is from this segment, because there was like kind of the chatbot, like let me pay $20 a month to see if I can use the latest model. And then there was this coding revenue. The coding revenue, I paid $200 a month, for Claude. Codex is trying to catch up in this game, the OpenAI's version of Claude Code. And they said that their July revenue, and July is the first month of Q3, their July revenue is more than all of their Q2 revenue. So I don't know, you do the calculus, what are the bounds on it? But it's roughly like 3x. On average, July is more than 3x, let's say, May. This is unheard of. 10x seen in a year, 3x seen in a quarter. These are numbers that are going to imply that there's going to be infinite demand and profitable infinite demand, both for the users and the providers forever. I don't know when we run out of, we're going to build software that does our job for us, let alone the fact that it could also start to think for us directly, but it could just build us the systems. I've been building software for many years now in my career, and I've been a physicist before that. And I can think of 1,000 things I would do with Fable. I'm doing one of them as hard as I can, hopefully be successful. But yeah, it's unlimited, is my opinion.
Yeah, and just like this isn't hyperbole. So there's two new types of software we could build. Right, there's software we didn't understand how to build before, and when we get into the maths, I think we'll sort of peel the onion on that. So the software we didn't know how to build before; it just simply wasn't possible. And then there was software that we could build, but we couldn't afford to build, right? Which is, if you were a medium-sized business, you're like, I'm sick of my SaaS software. I'd like my own personalized software that ran my business the way I want to run it. That alone is an enormous market. I don't even know really how to size it, but we know that the cost of software development has dropped, and that market alone is opened up. So there's a whole new market for software that we couldn't afford to build before. This isn't new shit that we didn't know how to build. It's just stuff that we wanted to build, but we couldn't afford. So the demand continues just in that space to be enormous. But let's segue across the other thing that I really need your help with, Matt, which is the announcement from OpenAI that a bunch of math stuff has been solved or discovered. And the reason that I think this is potentially really important is probably a year ago, if not more, in our early episodes, we had this conversation about, is AI, does it have the ability to be creative? And we kind of tease that out a little bit. Part of that is craftsmanship, but part of it is identifying or creating net new, novel, something that we as humans have not already created or solved. And so OpenAI announced, I think was it 10 new mathematical theorems? I don't know. You tell us. What have they announced, and has it impressed you? Have we now reached the point where AI is creating net new?
Yeah, absolutely. The answer is yes. So the announcement was 10 new mathematical and computer science, new things. And then the way it's characterized is a problem somebody's been working on maybe for 10 or 50 or even 100 years, where many of the great geniuses have looked at it, spent a few weeks or a few years even trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And OpenAI was able to spend, I think, $2,000 with a new model. This is probably something that they would call GPT-6 that's being kind of evaluated internally. And they said for what they believe would cost about $2,000, they were able to solve these 10. I don't know if it's 2,000 per or 2,000 for all 10, but it's something like that. It's not a lot, right? If you think about the way that those costs have come down, we might have, things that can do things that we find valuable, that people that are the smartest people in the world have tried to solve and failed. And now the AI can do it, right? And that's kind of the standard we're looking for some sense of super intelligence. Now, there's a lot of things these models aren't good at, but that's an interesting thing for us. Like, is there still room for an application layer? Are there still room for companies that aren't just giant model companies or and things like that? But on the other hand, there's things that they're really good at that are definitely net new, right? And that, you think about what's a car good at that I'm not good at. It's good at certain things, and cars are going to change the world if you didn't have them before, despite the fact that, unlike, Knight Rider, they're not going to be able to do your homework for you. But now we have things that can do your homework for you, can solve certain types of math problems. And it's not clear that they're even better at all math problems than all mathematicians, but there's certain math problem types that they seem to be very proficient at and better than people that have really put effort in.
If we contrast it to software development is quite a well-known and understood set of patterns that can be, and workflows that can be sort of assembled together to create certain outputs. And most of the outputs now that applications we want to build are really an assembly of different components. Hey, I need a feed here, and I need to be able to watch a bit of video here, and I need to process some stuff over here. So the ability of AI to write really good code, build really good applications, once given the right sort of input, kind of guidance and instruction, isn't a huge surprise. It's kind of a known landscape in a sense. Does math have those same characteristics in the sense of...
Math has one characteristic that's very similar to coding. So if you have certain types of software, you can write them and immediately tell if they work, right? So you could say, I wrote some code, it compiles, right? For a compiled language, there's kind of some minimum amount of consistency to the code that will allow it to perform, right? So that's one thing you can check. And so they were very quickly able to write code that basically always compiles through reinforcement learning. But then there's also, say I'm calculating the prime factors, right? I can very quickly tell if two prime factors multiply together to reach a big number, but very famously, it's very hard to tell if a big number, what the prime factors are. Right. So it's a one-way solution. So it might take a very long time or a lot of intelligence to solve the problem, but once solved, it takes very little effort to demonstrate that is in fact the result. Right. And so those types of problems where it's hard to solve, easy to check, lots of those in computer science, like does it compile, is a very easy check. It's automated. And then for math, some of these are actually fairly hard to check, but there's this thing called lean, which is kind of a way of deterministically writing down the problem and the solution and then deterministically checking. So again, it's something that's hard to come up with these solutions. And some of these solutions are like 1,000,000 lines, but because they're written in a way that conforms to lean, lean is able to go through, and you imagine it might be huge numbers of edge cases and branches, and it's going to prove each edge case. That's a lot of times, hey, I'm going to show that this is true. Well, there's only 6 ways for this to work. And so I'm going to solve the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one. And then now that all 6 are true, then therefore the main theorem is true. That's how you would, that's one way of solving these math problems. You have these branching edge cases, right? Imagine there's 50,000, right? That might be something that a human wants to go through and address every one of these little use cases. Usually, as you're a mathematician, you're a little bit lazy. You're going to try to like classify 50,000 into 25,000 in A and 25,000 in B and solve A and then solve B and then you're done. But sometimes that's not how the world works, and you can go through all 50,000 one at a time. Now, in the cases of these math problems, it seems like it's a bit of a mix of those. If you go through every edge case and you happen to try every technique in a very large toolbox, sometimes it works well and you can get the end-to-end mathematical solution into something that Lean can read, and then you prove that it's correct in Lean, and everyone sits and looks at it like, I don't really understand why that's true, but it's interesting. Then there's other ones where it just kind of magically comes up with a counterexample. So for instance, you say, have a theorem that says, no algebraic equation can ever have this property. Well, a very easy way to solve it is not to prove that in general this is true. You can just say, no, look at this algebraic equation. It has that property. And that was one of the ones that happened about a month ago. And you look at it and you're like, wow, how did they come up with that equation? But then when you look at it, you're like, this is true. Very easy to understand. But then there isn't really like a great deal of understanding of why it's true at the end. It's like the AI can't tell you, here's the class. And so that's, I think, a part where a lot of mathematicians are now digging in and saying, okay, why is this true? Instead of just knowing that it's true or false.
So is it true to say that there are 2 types of mathematical problems? One that has a somewhat known or understood set of possible solutions. The challenge is there's many, many, many of them, and you got to work through every single one, sort of a brute force approach. And then there is, which is sort of like the coding, right? You're sort of like, we know we can, somebody else has built something like this before. It's slightly different. We know we can build it with these components. And then the second type of mathematical problem or theorem that you want to prove or disprove doesn't have a known set of possible things to try. Because let me compare it to something very different. If I say to you, Matt, design for me a set of shoes that will be super fashionable and appealing to everybody for the second half of this year. Okay, how are you going to do that? You're going to use your intuition, you're going to see what's out there, but it's not a known set of solutions that you sort of have to find. It's, who knows? It's fashion, right? So it's not a known sort of solution set, if that's the right phrase. And there's something really interesting there. If we're going beyond just sort of a brute force way of working our way through, maybe intelligently through possible solutions, to a world where, no, we don't really know what, it's not one of this huge set of solutions. There's something extra in there. And if we're now at that point that AI can add that sprinkle of magic pixie dust to get to the answer, we're in a different place.
So yes, there is fashion in math, and not just in a negative way, in a really essential way to math is that, I think there's an old like kind of a saying that, okay, mathematicians solve problems, great mathematicians write theorems, and only the best mathematicians create definitions. And I think, if you really have to understand the way that math works. Doing math, and when I got a math degree at Berkeley, I took the hardest math class there, which is H104. And this guy, Charles Pugh, was teaching it. And it was absolutely brutal. 20 hours a week of homework. And I think I got a B+. My GPA was not great, but I took the hardest classes there were at Berkeley. And that was H104 was recognized as the hardest class. And what I got out of that was that I think as you come in when you're, teenager, you're in high school, you come into math, you think that there's just things, there's numbers and there's equations. There's these things that have always existed. There's no mystery to them. And when I took that class, what was very clear is that the hard part of math, for me, the thing that made me much better after that class, significantly better, was that like, you have to really read the definition. So when you say something is like an open set, right? There's this impulse that had to be like trained out of me through like brutal like force, these 20-hour problem sets that were just absolutely terrible. And I didn't even do that well in them, right? And this is Berkeley, by the way. Only 20% of people get A's at Berkeley. It's not Harvard where like 4% of people get B's or whatever. So yeah, you had to do really, really well to get an A. And the thing that was holding me back is I would always have this intuition for what openness was. Right? It was a real analysis class, right? And that's not what you should do. You should be sitting there and reciting the exact definition of what open means for a set of numbers, instead of trying to have an intuition for what openness is. Because something can be both open. There's also the notion of a closed set. Okay, you think to yourself, okay, 99% of the time, this is what closed basically is. And you try to form this intuition. I ended up doing physics instead, and maybe it's more my thing. But really, there's always edge cases, and sets can both be open and closed at the same time. And they call them clopen sets. And it's just like, these kind of crazy types of sets of, like fractally looking, devil's staircase and stuff like that can have these crazy properties that you wouldn't think of. And all the interesting math is when you really rely on the definition. It's not just like up or down. There's a very particular way of defining things. Anyway, that's my intuition. I'm trying to give you some flavor of what math is like when you're doing it. And that was the hardest math I ever did. So I'm not doing the kind of stuff that these PhD guys are doing at OpenAI. But all of the greatness of a mathematician is that they're so good at solving these problems and creating these theorems and proving them and things like that, that they start to get an intuition for how math should be. And they create definitions that allow math to do all kinds of interesting stuff and create connections between fields and even have an effect on, the real economy or other sciences. And that's the really great part. And then some mathematicians have such an incredible intuition that I never was able to develop in my limited time doing math, right? Like whatever their intuition is perfect. And it actually incorporates that definition explicitly. And they're able to see through things and make these connections. A guy like Terry Tao is very famous for like just all these different connections he's able to make. And so he's able to define new values that he thinks will make the connections more interesting in the future. So, people always say like, is math like a fundamental part of nature? It's like, no. The definitions have been developed through an intuitive process. And AI is solving and finding counterexamples to problems, which is kind of that middle tier. Still more than I could do, more than anybody could do, because people have tried this and they haven't. Maybe if you gave 100 mathematicians a year, they would solve the same things, but they didn't because it was hard. And now it's cheap, it costs $2,000. It's a lot less than the 100 best mathematicians. But it's not yet at that point where it's providing that great insight and that intuition for how future mathematical objects should be defined. And I think it gives some hope for mathematicians, but hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it did. I'm trying to draw a thread, and I don't have great language to describe this, but going back to kind of this definition of creativity, which is fashion has an element of creativity in the sense of it's hard. It requires intuition. It requires some sort of level of prediction of human taste. Right. So fashion could be clothing, but equally it can be a bunch of different things. It can be artwork. It can be music. It can be around culture. And we're kind of, as humans, some people have this intuition. They can draw out of the future. They can see patterns and combine it together and say, this is going to happen. Right. And even we go back to Leo Aschenbrenner, his essay was super popular because it was of the time. Right? It just clicked. And so there's something about creativity, this net new that is so, I'm struggling to even articulate it. But when I think about this math stuff, when it's going to sort of open sets, it's creating something net new that isn't like, to contrast, if we said, hey, AI, go play checkers, and it comes up with a new style of playing checkers, you're like, okay, that's cool. The only reason you worked that out is because we just as a human race hadn't kind of explored that corner of the solution set, but because there's only a finite number of moves in checkers. So I'm trying to tease that out. Are we really just seeing AI doing a much better job at us of exploring the set of solutions? Or are we operating in a place where there isn't solutions and it's like obvious solutions or known set of solutions? And it's like,
no, again, like
ta-da.
Math is not something that can be solved or completed in any way, right? Like you define objects, and those objects, you can then define new objects with them, right? Like the Whitehead, this philosopher said, like, from many one, and then to it one more, right? So it's like you create many things. You create this new object out of all your different mathematical theorems. You create a new proof, but then off of that proof, now there's new things to prove. There's a new object. It has to be interacted with everything else again. And so the more math you do, the more math there is to be done. And I think when you talk about fashion and math, for a very long time, it was a very small group of people who would ever understand what you had done. And as a result, as a mathematician, you were trying to find an audience for your math. You were hoping that if you created a theorem, is your name going to ring in eternity because people keep talking about it, because it was useful, because it ended up at the core of what math needed to do to be viable in the future. Were physicists going to use it? Were chemists going to use it? Were children going to learn it in school? Was something that you could kind of intuit. And that's, someone like Gauss, you stop naming stuff after Gauss because there would be too many Gausses this and Gausses that. You have to kind of name it after like the second guy who kind of also helped with it. I read a story about I was reading some branch of math, and forgive me for forgetting, something like some algebraic topology or something like that. And the guy who invented it wrote it down in his notes and died at like 32. He was a great mathematician, but he just died young. And it just kind of languished, I think, until quantum mechanics. And then everyone was like, oh yeah, this is the thing we need. And they took it, and then he became famous. There's no way he could predict that. He just happened to be right. I think there's a lot of that. But now that AI can take all of these theorems and use them in new places and creative appropriation of things that other people had maybe never heard of before, maybe we just all, a lot more of us became mathematicians. Like, I loved math. I always really enjoyed the feeling you had of, it's like watching like a really good movie with a twist. That just like, there's that moment when the twist happens and you're like, oh, everything I know is wrong. You ever had that feeling? It's kind of like the Sixth Sense or whatever. You're just like, oh my God, your stomach drops. I got that feeling frequently doing math. You're just like, oh my God, I can see that I was like just so single-minded, and I never considered that could be true. And then this new like kind of epiphany happens. It's enjoyable. It's a great way to spend your time of like going and learning theorems and proving them and stuff like that. It will show you how your brain is very stuck and not as flexible as you thought, and not as and there's something you can do. It's like getting like a really good yoga class in, and then afterwards you're like, oh man, I should do this every week. And then of course you don't for 5 years after that because you have kids or whatever. I think people will enjoy learning about math. And if this makes it easier to to have access to some of these branches of math, then the great mathematicians will have a bigger audience, including the AI itself. So I think it makes math more viable and more interesting. I was talking to my wife and I was like, I'm like kind of like a bad scientist in the sense, and a mathematician too. Like, I never really thought of myself as contributing. I just always wanted to know. I was always like, what's physics? What is stuff? What is it? I mean, like, if at some point, I guess to pay the bills, I had to do experiments and write papers but I just wanted to know. And if somebody could tell me right now what things are, right? And what you find is there's actually a lot of books that you didn't read during grad school, and you keep reading those and you're like, oh, they already thought about that. And then sometimes you're like, well, Aristotle thought of that, and you feel really dumb because it's like been done for 2,000 years. But hopefully this makes this all more accessible. And if, none of us actually make contributions to science anymore, you'll just be like me, which is fine. And you get to look at it and find it interesting and have these moments. It's like a good TV show. You're just like, oh, that was so cool. I can't believe it. And that's my feeling about the future.
Well, it's interesting to hear you describe what kind of motivates you and excites you. Because as I call myself an engineer. I'm not really an engineer, but I have that mindset, right? Where you build yourself a model in your head, and you're really keen to either prove it or disprove it, because you really what you want to get to is that great model. And along the way, you're like, I hope I create, like, I design this thing or do that thing where people are like, oh yeah, let's use the Sweeney, blah, 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 when we're building a racing car or whatever. So, but to extend that to this conversation, I'm trying to, we all are, I think, trying to build that model around AI. And sort of the existential question is, when do we get to AGI? And AGI to me really means this thing that is all powerful, and it does a shitload of stuff, not just a super, super intelligent computer box thing, right? And there's a bunch of dominoes that need to get knocked over. And with each domino comes an injection of power, right? Into this AI. Coding, right, is very powerful, right? It gives you...
Yeah, and my opinion is math is not going to pay the bills, but coding is going to pay a lot of bills for a long time, which is, I think, why these guys aren't going to go bankrupt.
But it might prove... So dominoes get knocked over. Another big domino that needs to get knocked over is sort of physical AI, the ability for AI. It has the ability to sense through IoT, but arms and legs of robots will help it do something. Another big domino that if it gets knocked over, I'm going to be pretty nervous. Is this creativity? Is it really creating the net new? Because there's only a couple more dominoes after that to get to AGI. So anyway, that's why I was hyper interested in the mathematics stuff, because it's, beginning to...
I think, I think, if we're all going to be, have access to AI, go talk to your AI about Kant. Go talk to your AI about the actual definition, the way that the objects which you experienced are conditioned by your finite nature, right? Like, you as a finite observer are very important in things becoming real, right? There are things that as a finite observer, you can only observe as a finite observer, right? And so this kind of feeling that AI is going to become overwhelming, it isn't finite like we are. There are existential parts of being human, things that only a person who's afraid of death can experience. And those are important to us. And the Kantian point, I mean, there's a lot of Kant, by the way. It's the same as Gauss. You're like, oh, that's kind of Gaussian, isn't it? Everything's Gaussian, right? Like everything's Gaussian. Gauss affects everything. And Kant the same way. But like one thing I really take away from Kant is that, you only observe color because you have these particular ways of observing light. And Feynman has a really good lecture on how the cones and rods work in your eye. And like color is not real. There's no such thing as color. You're conditioned to observe sunrises and sunsets and find them beautiful. And they only have color because of the way your eye functions. But then in some other sense, the only things that exist at all are those things that we observe. So we're observing a world that we've evolved to find meaningful and only has that type of meaning because we are humans who have this finite nature and this fear of death and this fear of abandonment and all this stuff. I wouldn't be so worried. I mean, like, I'm trying to convince myself because on the other hand, I'm sending people texts. I'm like, it's solving all the math problems. We only have a little time left. So I don't know. I don't come to this podcast. This is like a blessing of it. I don't pretend to have any answers to any of these questions. I'm just like, I think I should pay attention to this week because it solved a whole bunch of math problems and nobody thought this was going to happen. And then the same people who are doing this and making a lot of money are also say that the world's going to end. So I should probably pay attention to that. But then also some of them who say this is exactly how AI is going to go. And here's the stocks you should invest in. And we're completely right on those two things. Also went bankrupt. So again, it's kind of like math. It's kind of like, man, I thought I would know how this go. But in reality, like the particular definition and the way things handle out is always surprising and interesting. So, you can't predict anything.
All right. Well, let's end the mathematics and philosophy section of the podcast. And
Great.
We got to wrap things up, but I do want to, we've maybe the last couple of weeks haven't talked about interesting kind of side things have popped up. And one that I wanted to talk about very briefly, I don't know if you have one, Matt, but rumors abound that Johnny Ive and team at OpenAI are going to be launching their first hardware product. And I've been excited about this because I think these things are terrible. I'm holding up a cell phone, a smartphone. If you're not watching, they absorb so much of our time through two things. There's utility that's in there, check my email, pay my bills, whatever. And then there's, let's call it entertainment. And if it wasn't for entertainment, we wouldn't hate our phone so much, right? Because we get utility out, we put it down, we walk away, we'd enjoy the real world. I'm really keen on kind of hardware devices with AI because I think what we're going to see is the screen going away, or at least I predicted the screen going away. And of course, that's why I'm bringing this up, because the rumors from OpenAI are that they are launching a portable screenless AI smart speaker. So I guess it's to go up against Alexa, but I'm not sure if this is the right form, but it's not a bad first attempt at really bringing a proper current sort of generation AI into our homes and giving us the ability to, to kind of harness that, get the utility without being stuck with, TikTok and Instagram.
Yeah, I think the hard road they're doing is the path dependence. If we didn't have anything, then of course this would be an amazing tool and they have the capabilities for it, right? On the other hand, I already have the function button on my laptop, which opens WhisperFlow, and then I can just talk to any application that currently has my focus. That's a pretty good solution. I also have my phone and I can just click a button and I can talk to it. Yes, it is distracting, but it's precisely the fact that it's distracting is the reason I'm not going to get rid of it, because to the extent it's distracting, it's because I want to be distracted because I love it. Because it's like, oh, I want to watch this feed or this YouTube video or whatever. I want to watch the Breakneck podcast, right? Like people get addicted to their phones for a good reason. And it's like, yeah, that's a hard uphill. Second reason I'm a little bit skeptical is that Johnny Ive designed a new Ferrari, which I felt was disastrous for both of their brands. I
thought that was a joke, by the way, the first time I saw it.
What an ugly piece of shit. And I'm sorry, sometimes like people do like kind of groundbreaking stuff and I'm like, I see where they're coming from. This, I was just like, you clearly wanted to build an Apple car, didn't get to, and then Ferrari offered you the chance, and that's the Apple car. Yeah. I don't know what the Apple car looked like, but it looked like that.
Yeah.
And it was just like none of the performance characteristics of Ferrari carry over. You can't handcraft batteries. You either mass produce batteries and they're good, or you do them in limited quantities and they're bad. So, I think electric cars are one of these convergent things. Anyway, I would love it if I believed that Johnny Ive was a guy who understood and was able to like do these magical things to get around the kind of convergent realities of markets. And Apple understands this is the form factor. Steve Jobs is right. No keyboard, infinite flexibility, has great microphones, great cameras. You're not catching up with this. And I think the same thing with Tesla. They built the perfect electric car. The Model Y is the perfect car. I have one. There's nothing you can do to make it better as far as I'm concerned. Making it faster doesn't make it better. Making it bigger, making it smaller. It's just perfect. It's converged. And Johnny Ive has already this year gone into a convergent market and said, what if we created amazing... I'm doing my little Johnny Ive. I should probably stop. And by the way, you got me with your Irish accent earlier because you're like, hey, these are Matt's problems. And I'm like,
Plural.
I'm not a mathematician at all. I realize you're saying maths, which because in Europe you say maths instead of math, and you say in Ireland you say Thursday, and and so on and so on.
There you go. But I agree. I agree with you on the. Here's my prediction on this speaker thing. It is step 2 in a 3 to 4 step arc. It is not an iPhone killer. Step 1 was Rabbit, and what was the other thing? The lapel-based AI. There was 2 of them at the same time.
A new one to plug one that Gokul Rajaran, who I love, is backing. It's called Pocket. So people are trying to attack the market. Obviously, there's a huge opportunity there. And
it's going to be solved. And it probably needs 2 things. It needs a killer app. This speaker needs a killer app to draw enough people in to start creating the habit. That's really all it is here. It's creating the habit. But the biggest advantage it has is voice interaction, right? I'm not talking Alexa. I'm not talking about shouting across the kitchen, Alexa, what time is it? Not that. I'm talking something that actually works properly, almost like, open whisper. So I think we're step 2. There's probably another version of hardware that comes after that. And by step 4, call it 2-3 years from now, we'll start seeing it, whatever that form factor is, nibbling around the edges of the smartphone.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy bet, but honestly, it does not. I want to see huge adoption before I get it all excited about it, because you see Amazon Echo, they wasted between the Fire Phone and then the Echo and all that stuff, they've wasted 20, 30, I don't know, lots of billions, lots of tens of billions. Zuckerberg has wasted huge amounts of money because he believes that it's his job to free himself from the shackles of being under the thumb of Apple and Android to access users. So he needs his own device. I can see the logic, and it might even be a good bet, but it's an extraordinarily hard and capital intensive thing. And OpenAI has a ton of capital, so, go for it. But it's a long shot, just because it's like, let's say that having a speaker, connected to the internet does enable some amazing voice thing. Well, Google has great voice, and there's no real advantage by shipping. And so you have to make more expensive devices to get locked in so that people don't just go with the Temu version of a microphone connected to the internet or their phone. I don't know. I've never been able to articulate the differentiation.
Yeah. I agree. It's not going to be easy. Okay. Anything else on your side, Matt, you want to bring up that we haven't covered in the last couple of weeks? Got you excited?
SpaceX is down off its highs, but is investing gigantic amounts in new fabs in Texas. I'll just do an Austin one. Screw AI. We're doing Austin update. Apollo Global Capital, which is one of the biggest hedge fund, private equity. I don't know what exactly they are. The gigantic super platform, whatever. They're going to move to Austin, apparently. So you have SpaceX headquartered in Austin and Apollo Global headquartered in Austin. So a lot of capital and a lot of AI. And then you have, I think Ellison's here and Travis Kalanick is here now. And then Michael Dell's son raised $1 billion more for a battery fab. So a lot of construction, a lot of new houses being built. Hopefully Austin's on the up and up.
And landed there. Thanks, Matt.